Hello and greetings to all of you. We are live here at the auditorium at the United States Department of Labor in Washington, D.C., and it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to the 2011 Davis-Bacon Act webinar specifically designed for contracting officers and contracting agencies. Before we get started in the program, I just want to introduce myself. I'm Tim Helm. I'm Chief of Government Contract Enforcement with the Department of Labor. I'll introduce our other presenters in just a minute. Before we get started, however, I'd like to give you some logistics of how today's webinar is going to take place. This morning, we're going to have 2 hours of training, specifically on an overview of the government contract statutes. We're going to cover Davis-Bacon wage determinations, conformances, as well as the contracting agency responsibilities to administer and enforce the Davis-Bacon Act. We'll then take some questions from the audience. We'll have a break in between sessions and then come back to you later this afternoon for a second session that will deal primarily with compliance principles under the Davis-Bacon Act, as well as an exercise on how to review certified payrolls. So we're just really happy that you've joined us today. The response to our webcast invitation has been unbelievable. We have over 5,000 folks watching us from coast to coast, and we're just pleased that you've taken the time today to join us. During the webcast, if you have questions that you'd like answered, we do have a mechanism for you to do that. You can simply send an email with your question to whdpwc@dol.gov. whdpwc@dol.gov. That's the same email address you used for registering for today's event. And at the end of both the morning session and the afternoon session, we'll answer as many of your questions as we're able to in the time allotted. Before I get started, I'd like to introduce our presenters for the day. First of all, to my left is Rex Elliott. Mr. Elliott is the Contractor Industrial Relations Officer for the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA. And to his left is Jade Banks. She's the National Labor Advisor for the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. We're very pleased to be partnering with these agencies as we proceed on this Davis-Bacon webinar for the contracting agencies. And now I'd like to take a moment and have a welcome to you from our Secretary of Labor, Hilda Solis.
Greetings from the Department of Labor, and welcome to the Government Contracting Officials Prevailing Wage Conference webcast. The Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division is hosting this free webcast exclusively for federal, state, and local contracting agencies. Our purpose is to highlight the important role that you play in administering the prevailing wage provisions of both the Davis-Bacon Act and the Service Contract Act. At the Department of Labor, we know that a well-informed federal contracting community is needed to ensure our workers receive the wages guaranteed to them by law. We're committed to developing partnerships with our contracting officials to make sure workers receive a lawful, livable wage. Since 2009, the Department's Wage and Hour Division, under the leadership of Deputy Administrator Nancy Leppink, has executed an ambitious program to provide key stakeholders like you with compliance assistance. We've hosted prevailing wage conferences in cities throughout the United States. We appreciate those of you who've joined us at one of these gatherings, and for those of you who haven't, we hope to see you at future meetings. As Secretary of Labor, I believe it's more important than ever to enforce our prevailing wage laws. Davis-Bacon has helped our construction and service workers since the Great Depression. Especially during these difficult economic times, it's crucial that local workers not have their livelihoods undercut when carrying out public works projects. We believe in a proactive two-step strategy. Step one is to make sure contractors are educated on their prevailing wage obligations. Step two is to oversee an enhanced enforcement process that curtails violations and promotes an efficient and orderly procurement process. I'm proud that my Department of Labor has doubled investigations of Davis-Bacon violations. We've collected millions of dollars in back wages owed to workers, and we've debarred contractors who break the law. I appreciate your efforts on behalf of the American worker. Working together, I know we can administer our laws efficiently and effectively, and correct problems wherever we find them. On behalf of all of us here at the Department of Labor, thank you for your participation in this webcast.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, for those kind words of welcome, as indeed we are very pleased that all of you have joined us today. So it's time to get to work. The first session that we're going to talk about today is an overview of all the federal prevailing wage law statutes. As we have done prevailing wage conferences across the country the past 2 years, we've learned that receiving an overview of the federal prevailing wage laws has simply been helpful in further understanding the Davis-Bacon Act. In addition, we are all government officials here. We tend to use acronyms, so this is an opportunity for you to associate the acronyms to the actual acts as we get further into the presentation so that you'll be better able to understand some of the topics that we're going to be discussing today. The first slide we have here is the internet sites, and we'll be showing several slides throughout our conference on various resources that are available to all of you on the internet. Wage determinations online at WDOL.gov. We're going to spend an amount of time this morning going through that website and assisting you in understanding how to locate wage determinations, as well as all the other resources that are available on that website. And indeed, there are other website addresses there for you. As contracting officers, I'm sure you're looking at the excluded parties list system to make sure that contractors are eligible to be working on projects. We have the HUD address there that has a wealth of information regarding the related act programs that are administered by our agency at the Housing and Urban Development. Regulations. There are regulations that involve all of our programs, and these are Department of Labor regulations that have a direct impact on the Davis-Bacon Act. In addition, we also have regulations that pertain to other statutes that are covered in this opening presentation, including the Service Contract Act, as well as the Fair Labor Standards Act. And these sites are all available to you. So, let's get into the main teaching. Hopefully, you've been able to locate the PowerPoints that are on our DOL Live website. If you've downloaded those, we'll be following those slides throughout the presentation. So if you want to take notes, you're welcome to do that. If you'd rather just follow along with the presentation, that'll work too. We know that a number of folks have emailed us telling us that the offices are joining together to watch this webcast, so we hope you're enjoying your group time together, and we'll be throwing you a couple quiz questions as we go along so you can see how you're doing with respect to the overall learning that we're trying to achieve here today. So without further ado, let's look at the Davis-Bacon Act. Davis-Bacon Act is the reason that we're here, and the Davis-Bacon Act was enacted in 1931. It was amended in 1935 and 64. The 1964 amendments incorporated the fringe benefit requirements into the statute. The purpose of the Davis-Bacon Act is to protect communities and workers from non-local contractors underbidding local wage levels. As you know, the Davis-Bacon Act, or DBA is the acronym that we use, provides for the payment of prevailing wages and fringe benefits for all laborers and mechanics as determined by the Department of Labor. It applies to direct contracts with the federal government, as well as those contracts that are covered under the District of Columbia's procurement rules. Once again, DBA requirements: laborers and mechanics employed by contractors and subcontractors. You must be performing on the site of the work in order to be covered. Davis-Bacon requires that you be paid weekly, and the wage scale or the wage determination must be posted at the job site. Coverage under Davis-Bacon requires that any contract in excess of $2,000 to which the federal government or the District of Columbia is a party for construction, alteration, or repair, including painting or decorating of public buildings or public works, is a covered contract under the Davis-Bacon Act. So what are criteria for coverage under Davis-Bacon? One, the contract has to be an agreement to which the United States or the District of Columbia is a party. It has to include a contract for construction, and the contract for construction must be for a public building or a public work. So that's the straight up Davis-Bacon. So for all of you federal contracting agencies, you're probably quite familiar with direct Davis-Bacon covered contracts, where the GSA is awarding a contract, for example, of constructing a federal office building. We also have what is known as the Davis-Bacon and Related Acts, and that's what we're going to move to now. The acronym we use for this section is DBRA, the Davis-Bacon Related Acts. In this case, the Davis-Bacon provisions have been extended to numerous Related Act provisions that may provide federal assistance in the form of a loan, a grant, a loan guarantee, or insurance. Some examples of Related Act programs: we have a number of folks participating from local housing authorities on our webcast today. You know that many of the programs administered by HUD have Related Act provisions so that when the financing flows from HUD down through to the local housing authorities, the local housing authority has the requirement to include Davis-Bacon and an applicable wage determination in that contract. The Federal Highway Administration provides a great deal of funding to the state highway departments for constructions of roads, highways, and bridges. And again, the Federal Aid Highway Act is a related act, and that provision requires that all these contracts, not awarded by the federal government, but awarded by a state or local agency, also must flow down the Davis-Bacon provisions. So how do you know the difference between Davis-Bacon and Davis-Bacon and Related Act projects? Here are some examples of direct Davis-Bacon projects. We're doing a lot of construction of new Veterans Administration hospitals. The VA directly contracting for the construction of those hospitals, that's direct Davis-Bacon. Federal office buildings by GSA, military housing by the Department of Defense, as well as projects awarded by the National Park Service and the Department of Interior for road work in our national parks. Those are all direct Davis-Bacon projects. Some examples of Related Act projects would be a HUD-financed or assisted construction project, and the Environmental Protection Agency awards a great deal of funds to state and local communities for wastewater treatment plant construction. Under the Federal Water Pollution Control Act, a related act, that local entity must include Davis-Bacon when they're awarding contracts for construction under that program. So that's the difference between Davis-Bacon and Related Acts. Let's take a look now at lease construction and how lease construction can sometimes involve Davis-Bacon coverage. Where the federal agency may enter into a lease that involves the requirement to construct a building for which the federal government will use, leases can sometimes also include the Davis-Bacon requirements. The General Services Administration has very good policies on understanding when a lease project must include Davis-Bacon, and these are some of the factors that the Department of Labor has published for consideration of when a lease is also a contract for construction under Davis-Bacon. So that's the Davis-Bacon Act, DBA, the Related Acts, DBRA. Let's take a look at some of the other laws that the federal government, and specifically wage and hour, enforce and administer that require the payment of wages and prevailing wages. The first is the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. Many of you know that to be the federal minimum wage law. And there are terms that are in the FLSA that have direct impact to our Davis-Bacon program. So it's worthwhile for us to take a minute to talk about those, because the rules that we use under FLSA have direct application when considering compliance under Davis-Bacon. For example, a work week is defined as a period of 168 hours or 7 consecutive work days. Hours worked, employees must be paid for all hours worked in a work week. And the hourly rate is, of course, that rate that an employee is paid by the hour for his or her work. FLSA requires the payment of minimum wage, requires the payment of overtime after more than 40 hours in a week, requires a number of records be maintained by the employer to show that workers were paid in compliance. There are also exceptions and exemptions to the FLSA, and they're covered in 29 CFR 5.2, 525, and 541. So the current minimum wage, $7.25. That's the federal minimum wage. There are some states that have a higher minimum wage, and of course those states would be responsible for administering that higher requirement. But for federal purposes, the Wage and Hour Division enforces a minimum wage rate of $7.25 an hour. What are some exemptions to the FLSA requirement? There are some that provide for non-payment of minimum wage and overtime. They're oftentimes based on the activities and not the titles, and they apply on a work week basis. We typically look at these folks as 541 or salaried exempt individuals. And we'll soon learn that if you are salaried exempt under the FLSA, you also then are not covered by the Davis-Bacon Act provisions. So understanding a bit of the exemptions under the FLSA has great import as we move through our Davis-Bacon training today. What's the purpose for record keeping under the FLSA? It's to provide protections to the employer to demonstrate that the employer has paid workers in compliance. They don't have to be kept in any particular form, but they must accurately reflect the hours and the work time that the employee worked. They have to be maintained for 3 years. And there is a Fair Labor Standards poster that's available on Wage and Hours website that can be downloaded and printed, and that must be made available where workers can see the FLSA poster. Independent contractors. There's a lot of talk these days about independent contractors and what's called the misclassification of workers. Workers who perhaps should be considered employees for IRS purposes, but are being called 1099 workers by employers. And these are some factors that we use to determine whether somebody meets the tests of an independent contractor. So, we have the Fair Labor Standards Act, FLSA. We've covered Davis-Bacon and the related acts. Let's take a look now at the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. The acronym here is QASA. If you were paying attention, when we talked about Davis-Bacon, we only talked about the requirement to pay the prevailing wage rate. There was no requirement under Davis-Bacon for overtime. It's QASA that requires the payment of overtime on government contract laws. It was enacted in 1962, and it actually combined a number of overtime laws that were currently in existence. And for any of you who were around back then, in those days we had an 8-hour requirement for overtime. If you worked more than 8 hours in a day, federal law required overtime pay on government contracts. Those rules were repealed in 1986. So for right now, we're looking at the 40-hour work week for overtime calculations, both under the FLSA as well as under QASA. So the QASA requires the payment of overtime to laborers, mechanics, as well as guards and watchmen at the rate of 1 1/2 times their regular rate of pay for all hours worked in excess of 40 hours in a work week on covered Davis-Bacon projects. In addition, if a contractor does not comply with the QASA requirements, the Department of Labor and the contracting agency can assess liquidated damages of $10 per day per violation for each laborer and mechanic who was not paid the correct overtime. For QASA coverage, it has to be a contract that's over $100,000 and involves the employment of laborers and mechanics. So we will have QASA coverage on Davis-Bacon and Davis-Bacon and related act contracts. And if you're going to attend our webinar tomorrow on the Service Contract Act, you'll learn that the SCA also is under the umbrella of QASA, and SCA contracts also have overtime protections provided by QASA. QASA is self-executing. Even if it's not in the contract, the Wage and Hour Division can enforce the provisions of QASA. And QASA has no site of work limitation, unlike Davis-Bacon, where the workers are only covered when they're on the site of the work. And we'll discuss site of the work this afternoon when we get to compliance principles. But for site of the work purposes for QASA, there is no limitation. So work hours at a home facility is also going to count for QASA computations. So before we get to the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act, we talked about the threshold for Davis-Bacon of being $2,000 an hour for a contract, and the threshold for QASA of being $100,000. So the question, true or false, is can a Davis-Bacon contract be excluded from QASA coverage? Yes, if you had a Davis-Bacon project that only was for the amount of $50,000, for example, the threshold for QASA coverage would not be met, and that project would only be subject to Davis-Bacon. Of course, the Fair Labor Standards Act has an overtime provision, and it's likely those workers would be protected for overtime pay under the FLSA. Let's take a look now at the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act. The Copeland Anti-Kickback Act has a primary purpose of prohibiting the kickback of wages or back wages that have been paid to workers. It also requires that contractors and subcontractors submit the beloved certified payroll record on a weekly basis. And they also recognize that there are certain deductions that are permissible for contractors to take on Davis-Bacon jobs, and some other deductions that require the approval of the Department of Labor before those deductions can be made. Let's take a look at the deductions. These are deductions under 29 CFR 3.5 that do not require permission from the Department of Labor. As long as the criteria are met in that section, these deductions can be made without any approval from my office. And these are deductions that, if you see the list, are ones that you normally associate with typical payroll deductions of a worker. These are additional deductions that also do not require approval from the Department of Labor as long as the criteria listed in 3.5 are met. There are some deductions, however, that do require the Department of Labor approval before the contractor can make those deductions. And here are the criteria that we look at in determining whether a deduction is going to be approved by the Wage and Hour Division. One, the contractor cannot make a direct or indirect profit from the deduction. The deduction is not prohibited by law. It's voluntary, either consented to by the worker or the worker's representative, and it's for the convenience and interest of the employee. Let me just, for example, we get quite a few deduction requests in my office. We get many deduction requests for employers who are asking for a uniform cleaning service. The employees have asked for a service to clean the uniforms because they don't want to take them home, or they may not have the proper washing facilities at home. And again, if that meets the convenience and interest of the employee, the contractor is not making a profit on that. A uniform cleaning service is one that we would regularly approve. When you're submitting a request for a deduction, it's important that your letter affirm that you comply with all of the provisions in 3.6. If you don't make that affirmation in your letter to us, we're going to have to write back to you and ask you to please affirm that you meet these tests. Let me just give you an example and say that a worker comes to a contractor and says, I'd like to take out a $100 loan before payday because I'm a little short and we had a family emergency, and the employer says, yes, I'll loan you $100. But the employer says, I'm also going to charge you $10 in interest so that when payday comes, I'm going to deduct $110 from your pay. Does that meet the criteria that you see listed there for a deduction under 3.6? No, because the contractor is making a profit from that deduction, that $10 interest fee. So in that case, that deduction would not be permissible. If the contractor did not charge any fees for the deduction, that would be one that we would approve. Let's look at the Walsh-Heeley Public Contracts Act. We've looked at Davis-Bacon, that deals with construction. We've looked at the Contract Work Hours and Safety Standards Act. We've looked at the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act. And I just want to mention the Copeland Anti-Kickback Act is a serious statute. It has a criminal provision included in it, so that where a contractor has affirmed or certified to the Department of Labor that it paid the back wages and submitted evidence that indeed that was done, but then asked for the workers to return a portion of those wages, that's a kickback. It's a potential criminal violation, and should you as a contracting officer encounter situations of alleged kickbacks, we certainly would ask you to contact the Wage and Hour Division at your earliest moment and convenience, because kickback violations are ones that we find to be very egregious and serious, and we're going to investigate them as soon as we are able to. Workers, we have instances of where workers were literally transported by a contractor to a local bank. The workers went in, cashed their paychecks, then came back to the van and remitted back to the contractor a portion of their wages in an envelope. That's a classic kickback, and where we have instances of those, we're going to not only investigate for compliance under Davis-Bacon and Copeland Act, but we'll also partner with the U.S. Attorney's Office to ensure that if there are any criminal possible violations, that they will be fully prosecuted. Now, let's get on to the Walsh-Heeley Public Contract Act, PCA. PCA applies to contracts for manufacturing of goods, supplies, or services. If you've been around for a while, you might have noticed that the PCA used to have a threshold of $10,000. It's now $15,000 for manufacturing and supply of goods, supplies, articles, or equipment. It establishes a minimum wage, overtime, and health standards for covered contracts, and it also has a prohibition of employment of youth under the age of 16, as well as a prohibition against the use of convict labor on these covered contracts. The PCA, typically we see PCA contracts now for the manufacture of military uniforms and military equipment. That's contract that's primarily for manufacturing, and the prevailing wage rate under the PCA is the federal minimum wage. So workers on a PCA covered contract must be paid no less than $7.25. Now let's look at the McNamara-O'Hara Service Contract Act, the SCA. It was enacted in January of 1966. It's one of the most recent of our government contract labor provisions, and it's administered by my agency, the Wage and Hour Division. The purpose of the SCA was literally to close the gap. Back when the SCA was enacted, we had coverage under the Davis-Bacon Act for construction work. We had coverage under the PCA for manufacturing, but we didn't have any federal labor standards law that protected the workers that provide services to the federal government. And hence the SCA was enacted to close this gap. Its primary purpose is to remove wages as a bidding factor in the competition for federal service contracts. The requirements of SCA: any contract in excess of $2,500 must contain the monetary wages and benefits determined by the Department of Labor, has record keeping and posting requirements, also has some safety and health provisions, and it also must include a statement of rates paid for federal employees. So, what contracts are covered under the SCA? These have to be federal contracts or contracts with the District of Columbia. The District of Columbia is specifically named in both the Davis-Bacon Act and the Service Contract Act as a covered entity. So the Service Contract Act can only apply to contracts for services to which the federal government is a party. If the contract is awarded by a state or local entity or some other group, the SCA will not apply because it has a federal contracting requirement. Principally for services, must have some work performed in the United States, and it has to have work that's going to be through the use of service employees. These are some examples of federal agencies that are also covered by the SCA, including the Postal Service, military exchange posts, and of course, we mentioned the District of Columbia. So, what are some examples of service contracts? And I always like to use our headquarters here at the Department of Labor, the Perkins Building, because we have a number of service contracts underway here that help support our mission of protecting American workers. Our cafeteria on the 6th floor is a service contract. Our snack bar on the 4th floor, the workers employed in there are protected by the SCA. Our security guard forces, that's a service contract. We also have housekeeping and cleaning and supply and moving contracts. All of those workers covered and protected by the SCA. This is a definition of what in the USA applies to for the SCA. We get a number of inquiries in my office for folks who have gone to Afghanistan or some other places in the Middle East working on quote-unquote service contract type work in a foreign land. Only workers performing work in the United States are protected by the SCA. Workers who may be employed on service type contracts in a foreign country, they're protected only by the agreement that they may have between themselves and their employer. Here are some examples of contracts that are not service contract covered, and you can read them on your own. So, I think I made that through in pretty good time. What do you think, gang? So I'd like to now introduce Jade Banks. Jade Banks, labor advisor with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and she's going to go through some of the important contracting agency responsibilities as we move forward in our presentation.
Thank you, Tim. Good morning, everyone. Agency responsibilities, it's a very important area to cover. The reorganization plan number 14 of 1950 made the Department of Labor responsible and gave it the authority to coordinate the administration and enforcement of Davis-Bacon wage requirements across all the federal agencies. Excuse me. The Department of Labor establishes prevailing wage rates, sets standards, issues regulations, and prescribes procedures for all federal agencies to follow. And I said all federal agencies because the plan also reiterated that the actual performance of enforcement activities remained the responsibility of the federal agency that awarded the contract or that provides the federal assistance. So DOL holds us accountable for the proper execution of those duties. DOL, I think, wants us all to succeed, so they've provided training. Notably, the prevailing wage conferences that have been conducted over the past 3 years, and again today, a webcast that is designed specifically for federal, state, and local contracting agencies. Now, some agencies, like HUD, administer programs under the related acts, and in those cases where HUD isn't actually awarding the contract, we've made the state and local agencies administering those programs responsible for labor standards. So we hold those agencies responsible. Now, I might argue that all the work that we do is important, but there are certain things that we do, and it's absolutely crucial that we do them right. When we don't, it can get very messy, it can get very expensive, and it can leave us, or our agency, holding the bag for making it right, including funding back wage payments. So, the things that are important for us to do. Do we have the clicker around here to go back one? Okay, cool. The things that are important for us to do, preparing bid documents and contract specifications, that is critical. We've got to get it right. Number one, we've got to make sure that the applicable wage decision and the contract clauses are in those documents. The clauses are found at 29 CFR 5.5. They may not be modified without DOL's approval. Now, HUD, because we have a variety of programs and a variety of program participants, we've created some clauses that are specific to our needs, and they have been approved by the Department of Labor. The first is the HUD 4010, Federal Labor Standards Provisions, and we use that for community development programs. Programs like the CDBG program, Neighborhood Stabilization, and Home. Another form that we have is the HUD 5370, and those, I think, are conditions for the general contract. I don't recall the name off the top of my head. In any case, we use that form for public and Indian housing programs. So that's the first thing, making sure that those documents are in the contract. Another crucial task is selecting the correct wage decision. We need to make certain that we select the wage decision based on the location of the project, the type of construction involved, and the effective date or the lock-in date for that wage decision. We need to make certain that contractors are aware of what wage rates on the wage decision apply to their work and what work is performed by various classifications. For example, sometimes wage decisions carry both residential and building wage rates. A contractor is going to find the rate that looks best to them. So a contractor might see on a wage decision that a residential wage rate is more attractive to them than the building wage rate. And thinking, well, they're only working on the first and second floors of a 6-story building, they can go ahead and use a residential rate. Well, we all know that that's not the case. Just to show you how bad this can get, I have a few examples from HUD. Let's see. Many HUD programs generate apartment complexes, and apartment complexes are typically 4 stories or less, meaning that they fall under residential construction. A lot of residential wage decisions have not been updated for many, many years. They're being updated now, but they remained stagnant for many years. I guess we grew complacent. Some of our program participants might have always also. So we weren't really careful about making sure we checked for updates. We just used the same wage decision that we'd used for the past 10 years because it hadn't changed. Well, for one project, we issued a residential wage decision. The wage decision was updated before its effective date, before it locked in. HUD didn't check for updates. And as you can imagine, when you're updating a wage decision to cover, say, 10 years, those increases can be quite dramatic. Well, while HUD was working to sort that out, we found out that, oh, this wasn't a 4-story or less building. No, this was 5 and 6 stories. So we had to not only correct the wage decision because it was outdated, it was also for the wrong kind of construction. In the end, we calculated about $800,000 due to roughly 800 workers that had been employed on that project. Because it was HUD's mistake, HUD was liable for the payment of the back wages in that case. Another example, we had an agency that decided that 4 stories of stick-built apartments on top of an above-ground garage was still 4 stories of stick-built construction, and they used the residential wage decision. Obviously, that's not correct, and that cost that agency roughly, I think, no more than $1 million. As a final example, we had an owner of a property that decided that certain aspects of work that was being done in conjunction with some construction work would not be subject to Davis-Bacon. That work was wiring for telecommunications. They learned that it actually was subject to Davis-Bacon requirements. In a sincere effort to correct that mistake, they took the wage decision and they selected 2 classifications for that work, a cable splicer and a groundsman. And the average cost for those classifications ran about $22 an hour. They calculated that would cost them about $415,000 more for that contract work. They weren't happy about it, but they thought that they could live with that. Trouble is, the classifications and wage rates that they chose were under line construction, so they were not applicable to the interior, inside telecommunications wiring. That work is properly classified as electrician's work. That rate on the wage decision is $46.54. And now they've calculated that the restitution they're going to have to fund is in excess of $702,000. So you can see that mistakes in this area can really, really hurt. And so this is one area where I would stress to you, in part because of HUD's own experience, it's critical that the contract documents are prepared correctly, and it's also critical that we select the correct wage decision. The next slide concerns the reorganization plan number 14 regarding DOL's responsibilities. And we've already covered that, so I think, Rex, we could probably go ahead and move to the agency's responsibilities.
Thank you, Jade. The reorganization plan that Jade talked about had an impact upon agency responsibilities as well. It established that the contracting agencies, or in this case, in case of HUD, and other grant-making agencies, the financial assistance agencies, have responsibilities for enforcement of Davis-Bacon Act. And here's a list of various responsibilities that come under enforcement. contract stipulations or clauses. Stipulations apparently is a term that's used for grant-making agencies, but for contract awarding agencies, we usually use the term clauses or prescriptions. Actually getting the wage determinations, making sure that the contractor posts the correct poster for Davis-Bacon enforcement, reviewing weekly certified payrolls, conducting employee interviews and investigations in the field, actually talking to the workers that are doing the work, finding out this is what you're being paid, and comparing that to what the weekly payrolls say. The only way to ensure that it's accurate is to go out into the field and do that. And forwarding any refusal to pay situations to the Department of Labor for appropriate action. There's also twice a year enforcement reports that are given to the Department of Labor on actions we take enforcing the Davis-Bacon Act. The Davis-Bacon labor standards and contract stipulations uses the term labor standards. And what that means is that all the various laws that Tim talked about, Davis-Bacon, QASA, Copeland Act, as well as the accompanying regulations in Title 29 of the Code of Federal Regulations, all that together refers to labor standards. Now, I think it's useful for us as civil servants to remind ourselves that when we became civil servants, we took an oath to support and defend the Constitution of the United States and defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. The reason why I make a point about that is because each of us who is a civil servant has taken an oath that we will follow what the laws say. The Constitution says Congress makes these laws, and we're obliged to follow them. We've taken an oath. It's a matter of our basic integrity. In addition to that, Congress made the Administrative Procedures Act in 1946, which said, hey, federal agencies, whatever rules you operate by, write them down and give the public an opportunity to see them and to comment on them. And that's what led to the Code of Federal Regulations, which the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulation, is part of. So by extension, we've all taken an oath that we will follow the FAR as well. So when we're in that crunch, when we're trying to accomplish whatever the mission is for our agency, remember, we've taken an oath. We'll follow the rules. Accomplish the mission, but do it within the constraints of what the rules say you have to do. The particular FAR clause 52-222-6 is the clause that goes in most contracts that are awarded under the Davis-Bacon Act. In addition, FAR 22404-12 lists 4 different methods you can use for doing contract price adjustments under a Davis-Bacon Act contract. Now I'm going to talk about wage determinations. I'm going to move to the podium that Tim was using. Davis-Bacon Act has contracting agency responsibilities that we just talked about, but we're also going to talk about surveys, selecting the right wage determination, and how to interpret those wage determinations. Let's talk about Davis-Bacon Act survey process. Davis-Bacon Act surveys are for the purpose of obtaining what the prevailing wages are in a given area. Department of Labor has 5 different regional offices, and they do these wage surveys that try to assess what the prevailing wages are. There's a schedule for how they do this, and that's available at this website that the Wage and Hour Division has. The Davis-Bacon Act requires the Secretary of Labor to determine whatever these locally prevailing wages are, and that includes fringe benefits, and those are supposed to be included in bid solicitations and covered contracts. The wages are paid to laborers and mechanics that are employed on similar construction projects in a local area, and it's usually county by county that this varies. The accuracy and completeness of this survey depends on survey participation and what kind of level of construction activities are in the given area. The Department of Labor tries to have a representative sample for each county, and that's why survey participation is so important. Some counties will have, it's common to have large businesses and small businesses, union shops or open shops. All of them have an incentive to participate in these surveys. The contractor should be completing the survey forms and sending in the data. If you don't get accurate data, you're not going to get an accurate wage determination. That's why it's important for us as federal contracting agencies to encourage contractors to participate. It's in their self-interest, and it'll result in more accurate contracting. Now, the Department of Labor prepared a crosswalk. They have Title 29 in the Code of Federal Regulations as the Department of Labor's regs. Title 48 is the FAR, or Federal Acquisition Regulation. And this crosswalk that's available at DOL's website shows you which regulations are where the common topics are covered in each of these two sets of regulations. Let's talk for a while about selecting the appropriate wage determination. Federal agencies are required to ensure that the proper wage determinations are applied, and are supposed to also advise contractors which schedule of rates applies to the various construction items, like Jade was talking about in the example of HUD. Which schedule applies for which part of that project or that job. Advise the contractors their duties also that are performed by various crafts in the wage determination. Now the rules in Part 1 of Title 29 of the Code of Federal Regulations govern the procedures for application of the predetermined wage rates. These are addressed specifically in those references that are in the slide that you're looking at as well. Now, where do you get the wage determinations? We go to a separate site, www.wdol.gov. Now, remember that W. It's not part of the Department of Labor's website. It's actually by a separate group that's administered by the Department of Commerce. So remember the W in WDOL. There's two basic kinds of wage determinations, general and project. Most of the time, you're going to use a general wage determination on a contract that you award. Sometimes these are called area wage determinations because they refer to a geographic area, usually a county. Sometimes it's a statewide, or sometimes even a nationwide wage determination. But anyway, there's a geographic area involved. Well, project wage determinations are a little rarer. They're done for a specific project. They're requested by the agency, and there's some other peculiarities to them as well. First, let's talk more about general wage determinations. Here's that official site for getting your general wage determinations, www.wdol.gov. They're issued for each major type of construction, and most counties have a specific wage determination, although sometimes it's nationwide. The neat thing about them is you can go to this website and download them. You don't have to go through the Department of Labor to get the appropriate wage determination. Project wage determinations are for a specific project. They're used when there's no general wage determination that's really appropriate for that project, or when there's a particular classification that does almost 100% of the work on the project. For example, roofers or something like that. The way to get one is to send a standard form 308 to the Wage and Hour Division, and a project wage determination is effective for a period of 180 days. Let's talk about selecting the applicable wage determination. It varies by state and county, and it should be for projects of a similar character, and there's 4 basic types of wage determinations that we'll talk about under Davis-Bacon Act. It's very important to get the most current wage determination because the latest wage determination supersedes the previous ones. Now, we said there's 4 basic types of wage determinations. The mnemonic I use is BHHR. That's the alphabetical order of these. Building, heavy, highway, or residential. We'll go through them one at a time. In my agency, most of the wage determinations under Davis-Bacon Act that we use are for buildings. That's any structure that's used to house people or equipment, machinery. It includes the installation of utilities and equipment to those as well. So that's, at least in my agency, that's the most common kind of wage determination we'll use. Residential wage determinations are used for, as Jade said, single-family houses, townhomes, and apartment buildings of up to 4 stories in height. If it goes above 4 stories, then you're probably going to be using a building wage determination. Highways is for more than just highways, but it includes roads, parking lots, trails, pathways, alleyways, lots of things. Sometimes we use that in my agency. Other agencies, that's probably the principal type of wage determination they use. Now, heavy is kind of a catch-all of various things. It's for large-scale projects like water and sewer line projects, building plants. In my agency, maybe we'll develop a launch site from which rockets are launched. That's a heavy construction. The Army Corps of Engineers will award dams and lock constructions using heavy wage determinations. Now, how do you know which of these to apply? Well, the Department of Labor has these all-agency memorandas, AAMs, and there's 2 in particular that help to determine which is the appropriate ones of these 4 to Sometimes there'll be more than one that apply to a particular project. You try not to get that to happen because that can lead to confusion and be administratively difficult. But if there's work that's more than incidental to the principal type of construction, then you would be appropriate to have more than one wage determination. Multiple wage schedules apply to different types of construction on a project. But the criteria that are used is if the secondary kind of construction is 20% or more of the total project cost, or that secondary construction is worth $1 million or more, then it's appropriate to have a second wage determination on that project, on that contract, for that same area, place of performance. Okay. All agency memoranda 130 and 131 talk about this. All agency memoranda 130 talks about how to apply the standard of comparison between projects of a similar character. And all agency memorandum number 131 clarifies how the agencies are supposed to use this, apply these. And those are available at the Department of Labor's website that's referenced there. Now, selecting the current wage determination is very important because it's supposed to be the wage determination that's in effect on the date of contract award. And that probably scares some of you that are in the contracting field because you probably didn't attach the, if there's been an update to the wage determination since you issued the solicitation, how do you deal with that? We'll talk about that a little bit. Typically, construction projects are awarded under using sealed bid procedures in Part 14 of the FAR. There's not as much of a gap between when the bids come in and when the contract is awarded. However, if you're using Part 15 for a negotiated procurement, there's often a gap in time. Wage decisions that are issued less than 10 days before the bid opening apply unless there is a reasonable time available for to notify the bidders. In my experience, there's always a scramble whenever you have a public bid opening, and I think it'd be unusual to be able to notify offers in when it's less than 10 days before the bid opening. But that's good to have that that flexibility. Now, the wage determination. One thing to keep in mind is the WDOL website has a feature that will tell you when a wage determination is due to be revised. There's a schedule form. You go to this chart and you'll see, okay, this wage determination, that's the one I put in my solicitation, and DOL says they're going to be updating it pretty soon. I better keep my eyes open for this because I don't want it to impact the award of my contract. In addition to that, on this same site, you can select when to send an email message to be automatically notified whenever a particular wage determination is updated. And you can specify how long you want those notifications to happen. If you think, well, I'll probably be awarding this contract within 3 months of when I put the solicitation out, put in 4, 5, 6 months, and WDOL will automatically send you a notification whenever that particular wage determination is updated. In addition, the Department of Labor has a procedure for extensions. If the contract's not awarded within 90 days of a bid opening, you can get an extension from the Department of Labor. Here's the regulatory citations for that as well. Now, selecting the appropriate, sometimes a wage determination has to be applied after contract award. When that happens, it's because the wrong wage determination was put in initially. And sometimes it was wrong, building heavy, highway, or residential. Sometimes it was the wage determination got updated and the agency forgot to update the solicitation in the contract. So when that happens, you'll probably have some kind of a pricing action to take place. When I was a contracting officer, I typically would ask the contractor to price out the price impact of this wage update and then decide determine as part of a contract mod what was the reasonable amount to adjust the contract price for. Now, there's also a procedure for when some clerical errors got into a wage determination, how either the agency can request or the Department of Labor can issue on its own a letter of inadvertence to correct the error. And these are corrections that apply to bid solicitations and contracts that are adjusted retroactively to the start of construction. And there's the regulatory citations for that. Okay, let's talk about interpreting the wage determinations under Davis-Bacon Act. There's four types here, things we're going to talk about in this section. We're going to talk about the cover sheet of the wage determination and what's in the body, the various classification rates and fringe benefits. We'll also talk about conformance requirements and the appeals process. Here's the cover sheet of a wage determination. You can see that it shows the state that it's issued for. I'm sorry, before we get to that, you can see the number of the wage determination. That's important because we'll talk a little bit more later about what you can tell from that number. But it's issued from the state of Louisiana. It's a residential type of wage determination. It shows the specific counties, or I guess in Louisiana they're called parishes, to which this wage determination applies. And it shows some a whole series of modifications that were made to this wage determination. You, of course, want to get the latest one, the highest number mod to that wage determination. Now the wage determinations are issued for a particular year, so you want to know what is the year that mod or that wage determination itself was issued. It's supposed to replace all prior wage determination, and the new wage determination numbers reflect the new year. The cover sheet shows you the state, county, and the type of construction. It gives a description of the construction, and it may have particular crafts or trades that are included or excluded from that particular wage determination. Okay, for example, say you have a highway wage determination, but it does not include any building structures and rest areas. That would be stated on the wage determination. Say you have a heavy wage determination. Includes flood control water and sewer lines, water wells, but it specifically excludes elevated storage tanks, industrial construction or chemical processing power plants and refineries. Say you've issued a contract with a building wage determination on it that does not include treatment plants or single-family homes. That's what building wage determination typically excludes. We talked about the record of modifications. What you can also tell from the number of the wage determination is whether the wage determination was based on union labor rates or as a result of a survey conducted by the Department of Labor. These are part of the identifiers, and we're going to go into that. Look at this chart that shows the number of the wage determination is ELEV 0101A. That tells you that it was the elevators union on which collective bargaining agreement on which this wage determination was based. It was the local 101 of that particular union and revision A of whatever, that's the internal processing number to show that particular sequence of wage determination. The collective bargaining agreement was negotiated to take effect on October 15th of 2006. So there's a lot of information in that number. Here you can see on another wage determination, this one from the electricians union, local 194, revision number 2, which the collective bargaining agreement was taking effect on September 6, 2007. Here it shows the particular parishes. This, again, it's got to be the state of Louisiana, under which this wage determination takes effect. And it shows that the wages for an electrician, with those inclusions of duties, base hourly rate of $22.35, fringe rate of $8.56. Those are based on the collective bargaining agreement. Now here's the other kind of identifier. Whenever you see an SU in front of the wage determination, that tells you it was based on a survey. Survey done, state of Louisiana, done in 2004, internal number 12, and the wage determination was submitted for publication on June 15th of that year. And this wage determination remains in effect until it's superseded by another wage determination. Prevailing wages for carpenter there, $11.78 base hourly rate, and they didn't have any data for fringes for either the carpenter or the laborer's rate. Sometimes there's unlisted classifications that need to be worked. In fact, we have a very dynamic workforce in this country. It's not unusual to have new labor classifications created. There's a process for that. There's also an appeals process. The wage determination, has there been an initial decision on the matter, can be whether there was an existing published wage determination, whether a survey was the underlying part of the wage determination, or whether the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division set forth a position on this wage determination. Now, Jade's going to brief you now about the process of conformances.
Thank you very much. And hello again. Conformances. We talked a little bit earlier today about some things that we absolutely have to get right, and conformances is one of them. It's really important to go over these. So, sometimes the wage decision will not contain all the work classifications needed to complete the project. In those cases, DOL regs say that any classification of laborers or mechanics not listed on the wage decision must be classified in conformance with the wage decision. So this procedure is called the conformance process. It's also known as additional classifications and wage rates. So in this segment, I'm going to refer to agency, and by that I'm going to mean federal, state, or local, not any particular level. And when I talk about employers, it's going to mean whatever contractor or subcontractor will be utilizing the classification that's requested. So, the contracting officer or the contract administrator, again, that would be the agency, whether it's federal, state, or local, may approve an additional classification and wage rate only when. There we go. Sorry about that one. When the work that will be performed is not already performed by a classification that is on the wage decision, when the proposed wage rate bears a reasonable relationship to the other wage rates on the wage decision, and when that classification is utilized in that area by the construction industry. The agency's decision then is subject to DOL's review and final decision. There are some things that the agency cannot do. The first thing we cannot do is we cannot overlook or ignore the need for conformances. It may seem at times that it's a nuisance. It may seem at times that it doesn't really matter. You already know what DOL will say. It may seem that way sometimes, but sometimes it can, again, get very, very messy. And so we want to make sure that we dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and making sure we have a wage rate for every classification needed is one of those things. The agency also cannot pull a classification from, say, a neighboring county, or pull a classification from the building wage decision if the residential wage decision doesn't have it. Just like horseshoes and darts, close does not matter. The only wage decision we can use is the wage decision that is applicable to that particular project. The last thing we cannot do, we cannot refuse to send a conformance request forward. We may not agree, we may not approve it, but we do not have the authority to simply refuse to send that request through. Okay, so what do we want to do? Well, number one, we want to start early, and this goes for both the agency and for prospective bidders or contractors. The pre-award or pre-bid segment is a good time to do that. Now, sometimes the missing classifications can be really obvious. You have a building and it's going to have an elevator. You're going to need an elevator constructor. Or most buildings I know have roofs. Chances are you're going to need a roofer. So if those classifications aren't on the wage decision, then mark them for conformance so that you'll be prepared once you are in a place to begin the process. Some may not be obvious to you, and those are classifications that may not show up until you get payroll reports in. So you'll need to stay alert to look for those. Now, Sometimes contractors will complain that they can't get a classification until after the contract's awarded, or that they're having a difficulty bidding for the project because they don't have a classification and they don't know what rate they'll be required to pay. Now, it's not ideal, but we can give them a pretty good idea of what to expect. And when the contractors understand what's coming down the road for them, they can make more informed decisions. Conformances are not processed for bona fide apprentices and trainees. Their wages and their employment practices are already set out in the approved apprenticeship or trainee program. Conformances are also not used for welders. That is considered more like a tool of the trade, so that the welding is incidental to the work that's being performed by the craft that is actually doing the welding. This is the top half of the standard form 1444. This form is required for use by federal agencies who are doing direct Davis-Bacon work. It can also be used by agencies that are administering related act projects. Again, because HUD has a variety of programs and a variety of program participants, we have made our own form, a HUD 4230A, which is suitable to the way our programs operate. The standard form 1444 is available at WDOL, and the HUD 4230A is available at HUD's Labor Relations website. Okay, agency process. Again, we cannot begin the conformance process until after contract award, or whatever event that it is that makes that wage decision effective. But we do need to remain alert to detect classifications that are needed for the project. There are several sources that we might use. Certified payroll reports, for example, may show work classifications that are not on the wage decision. On-site interviews may reveal other classifications on the job site that, again, are not on the wage decision. And the contractor may even contact you and ask, what is it that I'm supposed to be paying? So there are lots of ways where these can come to your attention. Now, the next 3 slides describe the contractor's responsibility. I'm going to skip ahead to the second one. All right, the contractor's process. Here is a list of the things that the contractor needs to supply on the SF 1444 or whatever comparable form the agency uses. Before we go into that in much detail, let's first talk about some general principles. When we're looking at conformances or additional classifications, well, it's really the employer's request. It's not our request. So when an additional classification is needed, the first question should go to the employer, and that would be, what do you normally pay? Presumably, well, because the wage decision represents prevailing wage rates, there's a good chance that whatever that employer is already paying would be conformable and can be approved. Second, the employer can ask for whatever they want. It doesn't really matter. We don't have to agree with it, but they can ask for it. They can ask for a wage rate below minimum wage. They can ask for something that is absolutely ridiculous. It doesn't matter. It's their request, and we need to make sure that we send it forward. A note on that one, local agencies must submit conformance requests through the federal funding agency that they're working with. And that means that local agencies will be sending their requests forward to the federal agency. States, on the other hand, have the option of processing these requests through the federal agency, or states can go directly to the Department of Labor. As to the list on the SF 1444, there are some things that are important to note. One is that both the prime and the employer are required to sign the 1444. And there may be a disagreement even at this stage. It's possible that the prime and the employer don't agree on the wage rate that should be paid. If that's the case, you'll need to collect the views from both the prime and the employer and consider that in your review. Now at HUD, again, we don't require the employer or the prime to fill out the additional classification form. We do require that the employer submit their request in writing and submit the request through the prime contractor. Okay, now the next slide just talks about the contractor sending the request forward, so let's move on to the agency's responsibilities. Okay, Now we've got the request, what's next? Well, now it's time for the agency to do its review. And this is a real important part of the process. The better we evaluate the merits of the employer's request, the easier it is for DOL to render its decision. So, we consider the request against the criteria for approval, and that is that the work isn't performed by a classification that's already on the wage decision, that the proposed wage rate bears a reasonable relationship to the other rates on the wage decision, and that the classification requested is used in that area by the construction industry. So let's say, for example, that you don't think that the request meets those standards. Again, we don't refuse to send it forward. One thing that we can do, however, we can call the employer or the contractor, explain to them what we think is problematic about the request, and offer some suggestions on how that might be fixed. We want to work with the employer to find an approvable solution that can be sent to DOL. It's certainly easier and probably faster for DOL to approve a conformable rate than to deny a rate that can't be conformed. Now, the employer may be adamant, and they may refuse to modify their request. They want it to go through just as they submitted it. And okay, it's their request, that's what we'll do. So we document our findings, whether we found that that request meets the criteria or not, and why. If there's a dispute at an earlier stage, we need to collect the views of the opposing parties. If we find that there's a reason that the request should not be approved, we of course need to offer our views as well. Meanwhile, whether we agree with a proposal or not, the employer can pay the classification and wage rate that it requested pending a final decision from DOL, provided that the employer understands that they would have to make restitution if DOL's final decision came out higher than what they'd requested. So then the agency sends the request to the Department of Labor, along with a copy of the applicable wage decision and with the cover letter if needed to provide clarification. Again, if there are issues in dispute, the agency wants to present the views of the opposing parties. DOL's established an email box to receive conformance requests, and they prefer that we use that method of delivery. So what we need to do then is convert our documents to a PDF and email them to the address that you'll see on the slide. Please make note of a slight correction on that email address. Between the words conformance and incoming, that should be an underscore, not a dot. When you send your request by email, you'll receive a confirmation email that your message was received. Otherwise, you can fax your request to the number that's on the slide. When DOL gets your request, they'll begin their review. And again, they're going to evaluate the request against the required criteria. When they reach a decision, DOL will send a letter to the agency, either approving or denying the request. Very often, if it's the rate that cannot be approved, DOL will offer an alternative. For example, we can't allow you to pay that rate, or we can't approve that rate, but we wouldn't take exception if you used this rate instead. So we get an idea then about what we might be able to do to correct that. The letter will also provide instructions if any interested party wants to request reconsideration if they don't agree with DOL's decision. So, DOL uses the same criteria that we use. And we talked earlier about being able to anticipate what wage rate DOL would approve, including whether the proposed wage rate bears a reasonable relationship to what's in the wage decision. So let's take a look at reasonable relationship. Okay. In general, wage rates will not be conformed that are below the unskilled laborer's wage rate. Then the proposed rate is compared to the wage decision. It's compared trade to trade. In other words, skilled craft to skilled craft, laborers to laborers, power equipment operators to power equipment operators, and truck drivers to truck drivers. If the proposed rate is at least as much as the lowest rate on the wage decision for that grouping, then that wage rate will likely be approved. For example, if we're looking for a skilled craft and say we need an electrician, and there's no electrician's classification or rate on the wage decision, but the lowest rate on the wage decision for a skilled craft is a sheet metal worker at $20 an hour. Then as long as what is proposed is at least $20 an hour, it's very likely that that will be approved. So DOL's decision continued. When the agency receives DOL's letter, we of course share that decision with the contractor or the employer, and again the letter will contain language advising that reconsideration can be requested. Now lastly, and most importantly, any conformance approved for the project must be posted at the job site with the wage decision. Okay, review and reconsideration and appeals to the ARB. Hopefully this is not something that you will encounter frequently. So rather than offering much in instructions, I think I'd rather offer advice. And that is, if you find yourself in a place where a wage decision, a survey, or a conformance is being challenged, the first thing to do is to contact the deciding official at DOL. That would mean then that for a survey, you would contact the Wage and Hour Regional Office, and if it's a dispute about a wage decision or a conformance, that should go to the National Office of the Wage and Hour, the National Office for the Branch of Construction Wage Determinations. So before taking any further steps, I would talk to the Department of Labor. No doubt they'll have a lot of advice that they can give you, and I've always found that they've never steered me wrong. So now I think it's time to talk WDOL with Rex. Thank you.
Thanks, Jade. I think the last thing we do before the question and answer session of this morning is we're going to talk about the WDOL.gov website. Now, WDOL.gov was created by an interagency task force that included the Department of Labor, Department of Defense, Office of Management Budget, GSA, Department of Energy, and the National Technical Information Service, which is part of the Department of Commerce. They actually administer the site. It's outside of the Department of Labor. That's why it's very important to remember that W in the WDOL. It stands for Wage Determinations Online. Now, it has links to the Service Contract Act and Davis-Bacon Act wage determinations, both current ones that are archived, and it tells you where which wage determinations are scheduled to be revised soon. There's also a library of various resources for labor administration. Here's what the home page looks like if you go to www.wdol.gov. You can see they have the three main sections there. One's for SCA, one's for Davis-Bacon Act. One lists the agency labor advisors, and all of the principal contracting agencies should have a labor advisor listed there. There's a library of the various resources, and there's a direct link to the Department of Labor's Wage and Hour Division website. There's some frequently asked questions that are available there. There's a user guide on how to use it, although it's pretty, it's easy to mess up. Let me put it that way. Once you've done it, it's you realize this is pretty good, but it can be easy to get the wrong wage determination. For some old timers like me that remember the old process of what it was like to put together a standard Form 98 and send it to the Department of Labor and wait for your wage determination, this is a godsend. I work for a high-tech agency, and when you find a technology that works so well that you can't remember how you got by without it before, that's a sign of a real success, and WDOL is a success. It used to be a standard lead time of 45 days to get your wage determination, and I can see from the Department of Labor's point of view, they were swamped with them. They did what they could, but now you can get it almost instantly. So it's a different world. There's the list of the agency labor advisors. If you go to the online site, you'll get a little more up-to-date version than this. They're regularly changing because the folks that do this kind of work are getting rarer, I guess. Now, selecting the right wage determination, there'll be a question and answer sequence that you'll go through. It shows with links to the library as well. Be sure to select the printer-friendly version of the wage determination, and then you actually print off that wage determination. You attach that to your contract. Most of the contracts I do, or did when I was a contracting officer, it would be an attachment in Section J, where you attach the wage determination in full text. You could also scan it, create a PDF, and then put it in an electronic library for your particular procurement. It also shows you here where the wage determinations that are due to be revised are listed. It has archived wage determinations, and sometimes you'll need to do that. Say you're adjusting the contract for something that happened a while ago. This is no longer the current wage determination. How do I get a hold of it? Go to the archive section. Usually it's there. If it's not, that means you probably have to go to the Department of Labor to get it, and there'd be a reason why it wouldn't be posted. But normally it's either going to be there as an active one or an archived wage determination. There's lots of links on this site to go to various contracting agencies' pre-award activities. The excluded parties list system's a link there. The Service Contract Act Directory of Occupations, Standard Form 1444 for conformances, Department of Labor's all agency memoranda, the Prevailing Wage Resource Book that we talked about a little earlier. There's a link there. Various state apprenticeship offices, acronyms and glossary. There's lots of stuff there, so it's helpful. That crosswalk that we talked about earlier, that's available there too. Here's some of the internet sites that are available. This Department of Labor Prevailing Wage Resource Book is an invaluable guide. That's where you get the guidance on whether a project is $1 million or more in value. Then it's appropriate to have a second wage determination for that same contract if it's at the same site. There's also a specific website for the Stimulus Act and a place to put emails. The wage determination site itself, Administrative Law Judges Library, Administrative Review Board, Debarred Bidders List, the HUD site. One other thing I was going to mention is that currently the Department of Commerce administers WDOL.gov. It's going to be migrated to the General Services Administration as part of an overall e-government project called SAM, or System for Award Management. And SAM's also going to include that excluded parties list system as well as several other things. This disclaimer is put in here for reasons that are I'm not really aware of. I guess it was recommended by counsel. That concludes the morning session of the substance, except for the Q's and A's, so I'll turn it back over to Tim.
Thank you, Rex, and thank you, Jade, and thank you to all of you out there. I understand that we are unfortunately having some streaming issues for some of you online. I'm told from our technical folks upstairs that we have 9,000 people that have logged in, and apparently that's challenging our system. I do want to remind all of you that this webcast is being recorded and will be available online, and I'll give you a date specific when I'm able to do that. But for the moment, I apologize because we have been getting some reports of some stops and starts on the streaming, and we're working to correct that. And before we sign off this morning, I'll let you know if we have been able to correct that before the afternoon. But for those of you who've not been able to watch it, we've been fantastic up here, so I'm sorry that you may have missed some of it. But we did get questions, and so panel, we're going to do some questions here. You have not seen these questions, therefore the pressure is on you to answer them. So here we go. We'll do the best we can. And Jade, the first one is for you. Good. And the question is, why does HUD have different rules for their funding other than Department of Agriculture, Rural Development, or EPA funding? And this comes to us from somebody writing to us from, well, Pat. It's come from Pat in Wideseth.
Pat. Okay, Pat, that's a very good question. The reason that HUD has different ways of managing its funding is because that's how Congress set it up, pretty much. We have roughly 12 related acts. That means that we have 12 separate statutes authorizing programs that have Davis-Bacon provisions in them. And those related acts all carry different thresholds. Sometimes applicability is determined by the number of units, residential units that might be in a project. Sometimes it's the amount of money that's being spent. Sometimes it's where the money's being spent. Sometimes it has nothing to do with either one, it's how many units are in a contract. And sometimes Davis-Bacon will always apply because there is no unit threshold. So other than the $2,000, HUD has many other layers of thresholds that it needs to contend with. And again, those are the thresholds that are set by Congress when they pass the legislation. Good question.
Excellent. Thank you, Jade. Rex, I'm going to give you this next question. The question is, are certified payrolls required from subs of subs? Lower tier subcontractors, for example. For example, the prime contractor has an electrical sub who also has a sub on the site working for them. Does this second tier subcontractor need to provide certified payrolls, and do even lower tier subs need to provide payrolls?
The answer is that it goes to all levels of subs, whether it's second, third, fourth level subs or whatever. Is the person doing the work a laborer or a mechanic and listed on the wage determination? If so, then the prime contractor is responsible for submitting a set of certified payrolls that encompass all the laborers and mechanics on the job, whether it's employees of the prime, employees of a first tier, second tier, third tier sub, or even independent contractors. If they're covered by the Davis-Bacon Act wage determination listed as a laborer mechanic, they've got to be paid those Davis-Bacon Act wages regardless of the contractual arrangement.
Excellent. This comes from Jeremy out of Allentown, Pennsylvania. If the federal government construction project is greater than $2,000, what would be some reasoning on why the project did not include Davis-Bacon wage clauses in a wage determination? Does the federal agency have final discretion on determining Davis-Bacon applicability to wage requirements for federal construction projects?
Is that for me?
Sure, give it a shot.
The contracting officer makes the determination of whether the contract is subject to Davis-Bacon Act, but that is subject to appeal, and the Department of Labor can overrule that decision. What I recommend contracting officers do is write a memo to file on whatever your rationale is on why you think this was or was not subject to Davis-Bacon Act or Service Contract Act. And the Department of Labor will want to have it subject to DBA when there's a choice between DBA and Service Contract Act, since that has puts enforcement responsibility on the agencies. So that's my advice for those situations.
And Rex, under the reorganization plan that we covered earlier today, we know that while the federal agency has the primary responsibility for administration of Davis-Bacon, it's the Department of Labor that has the final authority. So should an agency unfortunately make a wrong decision in not applying Davis-Bacon, the Department of Labor can direct that agency to take corrective action to incorporate Davis-Bacon into a solicitation, or unfortunately, if the contract has already been awarded, to a contract and require them to retroactively apply those provisions to that contract. And we've discussed this prior. Jay talked about a little bit under our regulations and the FAR as well in 1.6 F and G. If the agency fails to incorporate, they not only have to retroactively apply it, but they also have to address any additional costs to the contractor for that modification. Those are situations that we just want to avoid at all costs, and that's why your federal labor advisors, as well as my team, is always available to talk to you prior to contract award. After the contract's been awarded, the methodology for correcting that can be challenging, and we all know that next year's budgets for many agencies are not going to be ones with a lot of flexibility. So it's very, very important that proper decisions are made in the solicitation process, not only to maintain a level floor so that all contractors are competing on the correct wage requirements, but also that the agency protects itself from any further claims that may be presented to it by the prime contractor. Let's see what else we got here. This comes from St. John in St. Louis, Missouri. John has a question, and John's question is, apprentice and journeyman ratios are often difficult to obtain, and are sometimes not explicit even when we do get them, or are contrary to the minimum 1-to-1 ratio that DOL supposedly requires. If DOL approves an apprenticeship program, why is there not some sense of uniformity concerning the ratio language? And more importantly, why can DOL not post a given labor union's ratio online? We have had cases where DOL says the ratio is one thing while the union says it's something else, which can create contentious arguments between us and our subcontractors. Anybody want to field that one?
I'll start it.
Cool.
Okay. First of all, the ratios of apprentices or trainees to journeymen is set in the approved apprenticeship standards. It should be explicit as to how many apprentices may be allowed based on the number of journeymen that are employed on the site. One of the things that I think may be impacting a lack of uniformity is that DOL doesn't approve all of the apprenticeship programs. Many states have their own apprenticeship councils that have been recognized by the Bureau of Apprenticeship and Training. When the state does, then that apprenticeship council approves the programs for that state. So they're going to have their own views, of course, and that's probably why you don't see uniformity there. It probably also contributes to why there isn't one place online where you can find the ratio. As far as a minimum ratio, I'm not aware of one at 1-to-1, but the ratio will be stated in the apprenticeship standards. That was the start, if I covered it all.
Yeah, and I think generally we just know that based upon the craft, the degree of difficulty,
Sure.
that different apprenticeship programs have different ratios. Electricians tend to have a much tighter ratio requirement because of the nature of the work that they perform. But again, ratios are specific to the plan, and quite frankly, I understand some of your concerns, but the apprenticeship or the training plan should be very explicit as to the ratio requirement. And if there's a question as to what the appropriate ratio requirement is in the plan, it's either the state agency that approved it or our own Bureau of Apprenticeship and Training here at the Department of Labor that would be the ultimate source for clarification on the ratio requirements. When we do our certified payroll exercise this afternoon, you'll actually hear one of the advice that we have if you're a prime contractor or an agency, and it's the first time you've seen a contractor on the work site that is using apprentices and trainees. We think it's a great tool to ask for the apprenticeship plan as well as the individual registration form so that you can make a determination of what the ratio requirement is as well as what level that particular apprentice is at so that you can make a determination as to whether he or she's being paid the proper prevailing wage rate. Excellent. Questions continue to come in here, so let's continue on. This is a good one. And this comes from Anna in Troy, Michigan. And Anna says, if QASA applies on a Davis-Bacon project, but workers do not work 40 hours on that specific project we oversee, she is a contracting officer, can we even enforce QASA? For example, if the worker works 38 hours on other projects, comes on to our Davis-Bacon project and works Friday and Saturday, what would be QASA overtime, how am I supposed to know? How does that particular contracting officer enforce overtime in that situation?
Want me to take that one, Tim?
Give it a whirl.
Sure, why not? Okay, we're talking QASA. And in the example that you provided, you have workers that have put 38 hours in on your job, which is QASA covered, and then they go somewhere else and they work another 8 hours. So the first thing is that QASA overtime? I think we can be clear that there was overtime worked, but it's not going to be QASA overtime. If there is an overtime implication, it will be Fair Labor Standards Act, because in order for it to be QASA overtime, all of the hours have to be worked on the QASA covered job. In terms of how you would know that there are other hours being worked, the employer, when they fill out the payroll report, should be including for the hours only what's showing up on the Davis-Bacon covered job. But when you get into earnings, there should be a difference where the gross wages earned on this project is over gross wages earned other projects. So now you know if the figures are different and the all project number is greater, then the employee must have worked at some other site, and that might bear some more review on your part. But in that case, quasi overtime would not be applicable.
I believe we have some charts in the afternoon when Tim and I are talking about compliance that talk about the calculation of overtime as well.
And this may very well be a situation where the contracting officer may need to contact wage and hour, because if this is a contractor who may be using the different agencies and reporting certified payroll separately and not combining all hours for overtime purposes, that quite frankly would be more appropriate for wage and hour to investigate, since we'll look at that contractor's performance on all of their Davis-Bacon covered contracts. So should you receive information on that, that one would be an appropriate referral, I believe, to our agency so that we could investigate the overall contractor compliance with QASA. Let's see here. This one's a little complicated, team. You ready? Thinking hats on?
On.
This comes from Louise in St. Houston, Texas. We had a solicitation that closed in June, which we're getting ready to award. They're waiting for their FY12 funding, which I believe we all are. But the latest wage determination was incorporated. The date of solicitation was released. So they were current on the date of the solicitation was released. However, as they're waiting, a new wage determination was published, and it's a little bit higher. Do they have to incorporate that latest wage determination and request a wage rate adjustment from the contractor?
Short answer is yes. The wage determination is supposed to be the wage that's on the contract is the one that was applicable at the time of contract award. And there's that 10-day flexibility that I talked about. If an updated wage determination comes out within 10 days before the contract award, there's some flexibility there. But otherwise, you got to plan that you got to have the current wage determination at the time of award. Now, let me go back a little bit. In the old days, when I was requesting wage determinations and it would take 45 days standard to get one, I would often issue a solicitation that had what I call a dummy wage determination. It was one that the different offerers would use. They would price it and send in their proposals, and we would make selection on that basis. And then when the real wage determination came in from the Department of Labor, we would do a contract price adjustment mod that would be applicable only to the selected offer. We'd go ahead and award the contract with that dummy wage determination, but we knew we had to do a contract mod to adjust it. There's some risks in doing that. You could have, and I assume since you said the solicitation that you're doing a negotiated contract rather than a sealed bid, you could have an offer allege that, well, geez, if I had known I had the opportunity to adjust my prices on the updated wage determination, that could have changed the way my proposal would be, and it could have jeopardized the selection. I could have been selected. Again, that offer would have the burden of proof to prove that that would have affected selection. You may still have to defend that, but you want to watch to make sure that any contract pricing adjustment you're doing doesn't jeopardize the integrity of the selection process. In addition, you want to make sure that the contract price adjustment that you mod the contract with is only for the effect of that new wage determination, and that should be wages and certain fringe benefits only. You don't apply overhead, you don't apply G&A, you don't apply fee or profit. It's only the effect of that particular wage determination. So it's not an opportunity for the contractor to get well from some underrun or overrun that they had built into their price. So those are the two things I recommend you watch for. I personally would rather do it in a post-award basis, though. Award the contract with whatever you have, and then so that you don't have to get revised proposals, and then adjust the contract later, but make sure that that adjustment doesn't jeopardize the integrity of your selection. Kind of a long-winded answer, but there's some legal things you got to be cautious of in this scenario, and it's not unusual, particularly as we go to more best value selections of offers and do fewer sealed bid selections.
Rex, I'll flip it for you. Suppose this was a competitively bid contract. what obligation would the agency have if they put in the correct wage determination at bid opening time?
You could handle it two ways, I think. You could allow all offers to adjust their bids and prior to award. It seems like more work to me. Or if you've already had your bid opening, then you have an apparent low offer, and you can, I would deal with it post-award by updating the contract with a modification and adjusting for any price that way. Less chance of that happening when you're doing sealed bid, but in your case, you're waiting for funding, so you got a several-month gap, so I could see that happening.
So is there a time frame between the selection of the wage determination in a competitively bid environment until the contract is actually awarded, an obligation to include a new wage determination at a particular time?
You have to have the updated wage determination unless you have authority to do otherwise. There's that 10-day window. You can get the extension, a 90-day extension from the Department of Labor, or you have to do some kind of a post-award adjustment or pre-award adjustment and allow all offers to adjust their bids accordingly. So those are the only options I can see.
Ms. Banks,
Sure.
HUD projects.
Okay. They're the best.
Why is it that there's some related act projects under HUD for which QASA does not apply?
Good question. You may recall that QASA is applicable when the nature of federal assistance is only in that of a loan guarantee or insurance. So HUD has programs, specifically our FHA insurance program, where there's no other federal assistance, there's no federal money going into it. All HUD is doing is insuring the mortgage. In those cases, QASA does not apply. All of our related act programs that are administered by state and local agencies are subject to QASA if the amount of the prime contract exceeds $100,000. Good question, though.
Excellent. What is DOL's policy regarding pursuance of debarment against a general or prime contractor based on its subcontractors' prevailing wage violations, and what guidance can you offer to general contractors regarding implementation of a compliance program that is satisfactory to the Department of Labor? And that comes to us from Gregory in New Jersey. Yes, indeed, we are currently pursuing several cases against the prime contractors, not primarily for the violations that they committed, but for violations committed by their subcontractors. For me, the most important thing, the thing that I emphasize in our conferences is the requirement in the labor standards provision that the Davis-Bacon clauses and wage determinations must flow through the agency to the prime, to the subcontractors, and all the way down to the lower tier subcontractors. When those clauses and wage determinations stop somewhere along the line, that's the type of situation where a prime contractor faces some responsibilities, because they were responsible for making sure that their subcontractors and lower tier subcontractors were, one, aware of their obligations under Davis-Bacon, and two, received the appropriate wage determinations for which they needed to comply. And in the instances that we're looking at for debarment now, these are instances where we believe the prime contractor may have known, quite frankly, what they were doing by not flowing down the clauses. So to answer your second part of your question, failing to ensure that clauses flow all the way down, and for me, in an enforcement posture, the thing that's troubling to me is a contractor should know when the clauses haven't flowed down. How should they know that? Because they're not receiving the weekly certified payroll records from all of their subcontractors and lower tier subcontractors. They should be coming into them every week. And if you're not aware of the subs and lower tiers that are on your project and not getting a certified payroll, that should be a very hard signal to you that somewhere along the line that chain got broken. And I think the prime has to take immediate responsibility to find out where that is so that the lower tier subcontractors can be informed of their responsibilities. I'm sympathetic when we have a lower tier subcontractor, usually a small business, that bid on a project not knowing that there was Davis-Bacon requirements, bid based upon wage rates that weren't conducive or in correlation with our wage determination, and then along comes the prime saying, oh, there was a wage determination, you didn't have it, but I'm going to withhold funds from you for your failure to pay the Davis-Bacon wages. For us at the department, we hold the contractor responsible who failed to flow down the clauses. So where that chain breaks, that's where we look at for compliance monitoring purposes. But so that's one thing. I think in addition, implementing a program where certified payrolls are reviewed on a regular and reoccurring basis. Again, we have situations where a lower tier subcontractor submitted incorrect certified payrolls where they simply misread the wage determination. And those certified payrolls were submitted faithfully week after week after week, but the prime contractor didn't note the on-the-record underpayment of the wages for months until after the first certified payroll came in. So having an active program of monitoring the certified payrolls, I think, is a critical step for any prime contractor to make sure that they can demonstrate to the Department of Labor and to their federal agency and contracting officer that they are taking Davis-Bacon requirements seriously and conducting reviews of certified payrolls as well as spot checks on the site as to the number of workers being reported in a faithful manner. So there are a number of steps that prime contractors can take, and in the afternoon session, Jade's going to go through some Davis-Bacon compliance issues with you and some additional suggestions on what a prime contractor can do to make sure that they are demonstrating their commitment to Davis-Bacon compliance.
If I could just add a
Please.
point as well. We've always used the term certified payrolls, and that's a big deal. Certification is a big deal. It means that the person who's signing that certification states that the submittal is complete and accurate, and there's potential penalties for that, for failing to do that. In my experience as a contracting officer, I've noted there were two groups of people that were took certifications very seriously. Those were senior company officials and prosecutors. So it's something that it's not done lightly. It's a big deal that it says certified payrolls.
Okay, here's a question. Jade, I'll give it to you.
All right.
This comes from Van Seen from location unknown. Okay. Looks like Maryland, based on the area code. Does a salaried foreman have to be paid at least the Davis-Bacon rate for the classification of work performed? For example, a foreman doing electrical work. Does his or her salary have to be at least the electrical rate in the Davis-Bacon wage determination?
Oh, boy. Well, thanks.
It's all about love.
Okay, first of all, foremen that spend less than 20% of their time doing mechanics work are not covered by Davis-Bacon, they're excluded. So I guess it would come down to how much time is this foreman actually spending doing the mechanics work. That, I think, unless Tim wants to add something on the 941 stuff that I don't know.
541.
541?
Yeah.
I don't know. That's pretty much it.
So working foremen are typically paid an hourly wage, and some of their work involves some reporting or record keeping on the job site, but they also are oftentimes involved in doing skilled craft work as a laborer or a mechanic. If an individual is exempt under the Fair Labor Standards Act, they're paid a guaranteed salary, and their duties include the ability to hire and fire workers. They oversee the overall supervision on the project. Those individuals can often be classified as 541 exempt. And in those cases, even when those workers perform a little bit or some construction work on the job site, there's no requirement that they be paid, because our regulations specifically state that 541 exempt workers are not laborers or mechanics defined by the Davis-Bacon. So the question you always ask is this a working foreman who's often paid hourly based upon his hours in the week and spends a lot of time doing construction work, but may fill out some daily forms for the contractor and may do some ordering? Or is this the overall superintendent or supervisor on the project who may get involved with construction work on a periodic basis, but is paid a guaranteed salary and meets the requirements of our executive, professional, or administrative exemptions under the FLSA? If that's the case, then that individual would not be entitled to Davis-Bacon wages for that portion or piece of time when they perform labor or mechanics duties. This comes from Jason in Austin, Texas. Is the 10-day lock-in period for wage rates, are they calendar days or business days? And the answer, Jason, is they're just regular old calendar days, not business days.
Somewhere in the FAR it says that unless the FAR specifies otherwise, you're to presume that days in the FAR are calendar days. So there used to be a lot of confusion about that, but that was fixed years ago. So it's always calendar days unless otherwise stated.
Okay, this will be for both of you, and then we have one more, and then we'll do some wrap-up until this afternoon. Here's the question. With the requirement of assuring the proper wage determination is applied to a contract, does this require the actual insertion of the wage determination in the contract? Can the contract simply contain a description of the proper wage determination to include the decision number, date, construction classification, etc., instead of printing the entire wage determination? This comes to us from Columbia, Missouri.
Wonderful. I'll start with that one. HUD has issued a labor relations letter stating that it is not necessary to incorporate the entire wage decision physically into the contract. It's that you can refer to it by very specific means, saying that it is this particular wage decision with this particular date and this particular modification, and a hard copy of that wage decision must be available on request.
Why would you not want to have the full copy? I mean, they're usually less than 10 pages.
Not where I'm coming from. Our wage decisions can cover, I know there's one in California that covers 49 counties, and it goes page after page after page. So many times, I think just for the sake of saving trees, we refer to it specifically, and then because they're so available on WDOL, we allow that they include by reference.
Okay.
We have an agreement that it would be inappropriate to simply say, go to WDOL.gov
Exactly.
and find something that looks like it's right.
Or Davis-Bacon applies. That's
Right.
that's not enough.
You need to be very specific as to the wage determination that applies. Some folks do a link, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, okay, well, I'm being told 2 minutes, Danny says, which means he's hungry. So this is going to wrap up the morning session. Again, apologies to those of you who have had streaming problems. Our technical folks are walking in the room now, and they tell me they're going to reboot some systems so that we can get this thing back up and running this afternoon in the manner that we had hoped for. Again, I remind you that we are recording this, so for those portions that you may have unfortunately missed this morning, they are going to be available to you on the internet in a short time period. For this afternoon, if you go on our live web link, there is an exercise. It's about 8 pages on certified payrolls. I ask that you print it out during the break because we're going to use that exercise in Part B this afternoon. We reconvene at what time this afternoon? 2
o'clock.
2 o'clock Eastern time. And at that point in time, we'll go through some compliance principles, how to monitor Davis-Bacon compliance on a project, and we'll do an exercise on reviewing an actual certified payroll. Until then, that concludes the morning session. Thank you all for participating, and we'll see you this afternoon.